Mr. Cutler, you spoke at great length about the importance of creating jobs in the United States and gave some very trenchant examples. A number of U.S. corporations have found that in putting up new plants or in closing old plants, they can utilize the lower costs, labor and otherwise, that are available in overseas countries, and therefore make it possible to produce the same product at a less cost. To what extent has Eaton Corporation, your corporation, done that? And to what extent, I'm sorry to say, instead of creating jobs in our country, has it taken away jobs from our country?
Yeah, I'll come back and comment on Eaton specifically, but let me just start generally. I think in this whole area, many people hearken back to the 1950s to put the subject in context, at a time when the U.S. was the exporting center of the world. Many of the other economies around the world had either not recovered from the war or had not fully developed their manufacturing activities. And so a lot of models that I hear talked about in the U.S. are based off of the 1950s, where we say we're going to go back to becoming the great exporting country of the world. Some fundamental things have changed since then. One, countries recovered. Number two, they've had 40 years of economic development, and in many cases they have built very competitive domestic industries that we must compete with now. So I think it's, first of all, I would say unrealistic that we think we'll go back to this primacy model that the U.S. enjoyed in the 50s. Say, secondly, our own, coming to Eaton, our own strategy has been, and we've stated in many public forums, so I'm pleased to do it now, is that we manufacture in the zone of currency. Because one of the other issues you have seen has changed very dramatically, to wit, just the last 4 months, is the volatility of currency as you're seeing these growth rates between countries change, and as you're seeing the fiscal prudence between these countries be in contrast with one another, means that you can't count on the fact that you're going to see uniform currency relationships. So if you manufacture in one country and you get a 15% change in currencies, you will be uncompetitive supplying customers in the next country. So that's why we have structured ourselves by line of currency. We tend to produce in countries generally where we're supplying the product. That's our own philosophy. We think that's the most effective. Having said that, we still have very significant jobs in the U.S. that are involved in the oversight of operations around the world. And I think that's the piece many people lose when they engage in a really good, honest discussion on this subject is the U.S. as a headquarter location for major companies has a lot to gain when additional jobs are created elsewhere, because you will have head of divisions, you'll have head of R&D activities, you'll have senior people in the company that have huge spin-off environments into their local community for local legal work, local accounting work, all sorts of work that's tended done for a headquarters. And those are the jobs we ought to be expecting to have multiply as we build jobs in these emerging nations of the world. So it isn't an either or. We really do believe as you create a job outside of the U.S., you do create a knock-off effect here in the U.S. that is substantial. Does that address your question? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for addressing and taking the time today. I hear you talk about all of the different issues and your opinions on those. I want to leave here with a call to action. What do you believe that as business owners, as community, citizens of this city, what can we do? Jobs, jobs, jobs. I can't go out and, just start and create jobs. But what do you see as the hurdle to these solutions that you're offering?
Well, great question, and let me try to bring it to a point for you, is that today if you think about the 4 areas that I talked about in terms of setting the structure right, when you see an individual state start to debate whether they should have very different rules in the states that are next to them, I'd urge you to talk to your representatives and say no. Uniform Commercial Code, one economic union in the U.S., let's not raise our frictional costs in the United States. Second, when you see people advocating against foreign trade policies, I'd urge you to write to your senator or member of the House and say that is wrong-footed. Fair trade, yes. No trade, absolutely not. And it's too easy to hide behind fair trade. I'd ask you on tax policy, don't watch a bill like H.R. 4213 go through last week through the House with a majority and being debated in the Senate this week and next week without contacting your senators saying, wait a minute, you're going to cost jobs in the United States. That's a pay for some other programs that you want to be able to pay for, but it's a jobs agenda I'm personally interested in. When you look at a request to have more funding for educational institutions in your area, or vocation or secondary education like vocational schools, I personally would support them, because I think that it's so important here in the United States that we continue to take the high end of the educational capability, because that's how you have a better trained workforce. That's how you compete for the higher end jobs that tend to survive in any mature economy. It's very difficult to keep the so-called commodity jobs in high end economies, and that's true not just here in the U.S., it's true in Europe and Japan, and we've seen the history for years. So I'd ask you on each of these issues, every time you see one of these issues come up, think about what that impact on jobs is, and let your elected officials know there is a consequence for not supporting a jobs agenda, and the consequence is it hurts every one of us, and we need to be vocal about it.
One area that you didn't mention, and I would like your comment on, is in our transportation sector. 50 years ago, it was either privately financed or we had user fees that covered a significant portion of the total cost. The last two sessions of Congress, we're putting general revenue funds into our highway trust fund. Could you have some comment on that? Because obviously that's taking money away. It's distorting the market on one side, and on the other side, it's taking money away that could be used for other national purposes.
Yeah, without commenting specifically, it's a little different by state and it's a little different at the federal level, and so you get it's a pretty complex arena. I would just say I think what you're seeing there is the enormous pressure and the very challenging public policy decisions when you have an economy that has not fully recovered, and we think it's going to take several years to get back to the peaks of 2007. You have the pressure of debt, our accumulated debt, which is going to get worse for the next couple of years. And then you have a number of programs that are virtually squeezing out the important investment, whether it be infrastructure or education or other parts of the government, because we haven't dealt with the tough decisions saying, how do you get so many big parts of our federal government spending to look like GDP increases and not a premium over? And as long as we allow the three that I just mentioned to eat almost 2% more than GDP growth on an annual basis, we're going to have pressures like the one you just mentioned that begin to gnaw away at the important infrastructure for creating jobs in the U.S. These decisions, people know the solutions. It's just we've got to be willing to get up and make them, or we're going to undercut the growth in this country.
Sandy, how would you, if you were the chairman of the board and CEO of BP America, how your comment as to what the oil spill has, what impact it will have on the economy, global economy, and how you would do different than what they are doing at the present time. Worst case situation, how would you respond?
Yeah, Vic, I've always, and actually a fellow you know, Dale DeWint, taught me the lesson that don't comment on other people's business. And it's always been a good practice. Yeah, obviously it's a very serious situation. And I think when you just ask yourself the general question about crisis management, I think everyone knows the lessons in crisis management. Get the issues out early, deal with them as frankly as you can, and don't take any effort off of them. I mean, I can't comment on the specifics that they're dealing with. We're all watching it every day.
Mr. Cutler, how would you cope with the national debt if you were in charge of the financial conditions in this country?
As quickly as we could, but let me give you some more specifics. You know, so much of what we find ourselves dealing with today, a portion of it is because of the really very challenging recession we had, and so that, you know, incoming revenues are down. Having said that, when you look over the next 20, 30, and 40-year projections, virtually everybody agrees, both sides of the aisle, when you look at the revenue projections versus the expense reduction, I'm talking at the federal level right now, that difference is actually going to widen. And so I would start by saying that as important as it was to have access in the health care bill, it was also important to deal with the bending of the cost curve. And I think many people feel that was not accomplished, and it is one of the biggest issues we deal with that's widening the national debt. So I guess I would be saying let's get back and deal with the cost side now that the access side has been dealt with. There was a bipartisan commission on Social Security that came together 3 years ago from both sides of the aisle that recommended practical, gradual changes to the program. I'd say you have to get it put in place.